Welcome back to Advanced Composition. Professor Kent Lee here. We're going to look at some more grammar and style issues. So on page 146 and 147, I think, we have some interesting things about grammatical agreement. So agreement is the kind of where the verb form matches the subject, whether the subject is singular or plural, like she goes, they go. So goes is the singular third person verb. So this particularly pertains to third person verbs. And you can have grammatical agreement like that, but sometimes you can violate that for logical agreement. And it depends, it varies according to the type of English. So I want you to first discuss the coordinate subjects in 10.1.1. What do you think? Are they singular or plural? All right, this is sometimes a little tricky, especially the or. R is kind of, but number one, the construction or the weather. English speakers can take this different ways. People have different intuitions, but I mean, what's most commonly done, especially in more formal writing or more formal English, is that the verb agrees with the subject right before it. When you have X or Y, the construction of the weather is going to delay our travel time. But it's not unusual for a speaker speaking casually, informally, to say are, the construction of the weather, if they think maybe both. More formally, the construction or the weather is going to delay. The construction slowdown plus about the weather has made. Again, has made is maybe more common. Plus, some people tend to more often to treat plus as a preposition, and it doesn't affect the verb. But if you mean logically, maybe they go together logically. I mean, some people might say have, they might treat it as plural. All right, now let's get into more fun. The next section, collective nouns, 10.1.2, collective nouns. Which sound correct to you? Think for a minute. Okay, so here's a difference between North American English, US and Canada, versus Commonwealth English, especially British, as well as Australian, New Zealand, maybe other varieties of English too that are based on British. You might think that our government are letting our troops down. The government are. Sounds funny. North Americans would say the government is. It's a singular thing. But in Commonwealth English, the government is kind of like a collective entity. It's made up of more than one thing. It's a collective. So they treat it as a collective noun and they say the government are. So all of these depend on whether you prefer North American or Commonwealth or British style. The team is American style. The team are British. Band is or are. The committee is or are. The United States usually is. It's kind of like one country, although technically it's grammatically plural. The family is or are. What about data? Singular or plural? It's both. Informally, people treat it as singular. The data is, as if it's like one thing. But in academic English, if you're trained in research, especially statistics, if you're trained in quantitative research, you've learned to say the data are because it's plural. The singular, actually, it's rare in English, but it's from Latin. Datum, D-A-T-U-M, datum, is the singular in Latin for one fact or one piece of data, and data is plural. To Latin plural, um becomes a, data. So technically it's plural. And of course, whether you say data or data, it doesn't matter. It's personal preference. So a person trained in research, especially quantitative research or statistics or math, will say the data are conclusive. So you can kind of tell about their background with how they use data in a sentence. Okay, next section, 10.1.3, what are called conceptual or factual subjects. What do you think? Take a look at these. Which are correct? Many cars on the road mean? Are you really referring to just cars? Is that the real grammatical subject? Or is it the concept of the state, the condition of many cars being on the road? While you could say many cars mean, that's possible. I think more often English speakers will say many cars on the road means because you're referring to this one fact, this one state or condition. The idea of many cars being on the road means many traffic accidents. Same for 13. You can go either way, but I think more often high production costs. High production costs prevent reasonable consumer prices, but people could also say the cost prevents because the fact, the condition of there being high production costs prevents, although that's a little harder to say. So I think it is more common in this case to say prevent, but both are possible. All right, next section, numerical subjects. Okay, if you're not getting tired yet, you will be. 10.1.4, discuss those for a minute. Okay, 2 plus 2 is 4. Why is? You're talking about a fact. It's like a factual or conceptual subject. More than 1 in 6 Japanese is, well, technically you could say is because more than 1, but it's more common to say are to assume you're referring to a whole group of people. Are 65. Both are possible, but it's probably more common, at least to me right now, to say are, because conceptually this is logical agreement. So in these cases, it's agreeing logically more often. If we don't follow the number agreement rule, we're following logical agreement. So logically, we're talking about a whole bunch of Japanese. 16, 5 euros is equal, factual condition, factual statement, not are equal, but to a quantity. The quantity of 5 euros is equal to. Millions of dollars were spent. Okay, that's probably more common. 80% of the chocolate cake was eaten, probably, but 19, we're talking about people, 54% of students vote. Okay, not votes, but vote, singular. I say plural, because here we're talking about a group of students, logically. So 18, we're talking about still just stuff, but 19, we're talking about a group of students, a group of people. So it's logically plural. Grammatically singular, but logically plural. So we would tend to prefer logical agreement in such cases. Okay, it's getting even harder. 10.1.5, what we call partitives, like a part of, something of. Discuss these and what do you think? Okay, number of freelancers is growing, are growing. If your emphasis is on number, like the number, the quantity, the population, probably is. It makes more sense to be. But 21, a number of freelancers. There, a number of is functioning kind of like a quantifier, like many. It's like saying many freelancers are. So logically, the meaning is more like many. But in 20, it's more like the irregular noun phrase, a number, a quantity, a population of. 22, a multitude of elements were. Probably were, because really logically you're talking about many elements. Majority of the shareholders are, so it's kind of like many. 24, handful of bathers were. Number 25, a wide variety of dishes is or are essential. What do you think? Depends on how you interpret it. If you mean the variety, like the diversity of dishes is essential. So diversity of variety is essential. Or are you talking about many dishes? A lot of dishes are essential. You could go either way depending on your interpretation, logical interpretation. Same thing in 26. Either way, depends on how you interpret it. 27, same thing. Is or are, depends on how you interpret it. Variety of side dishes, maybe makes if you really mean the variety. in 26 and 27. 28, there is or are a number of cakes for sale. Number of cakes just sounds more like a quantifier, like many. So I would tend to prefer are. But you can make a case for is, like there is a number of cakes if you want to be really, really formal and correct, or if you want to emphasize number or variety of cakes. Confusing, yes? Yes, language is not so simple. You were taught sometimes really simple prescriptive rules. They prescribe this is how you have to do it. The reality is things don't always follow rules. Simple traditional rules don't always work. All right, next one, indefinite pronouns. Everyone is required to show their identification. In order to technically everyone is grammatically singular. It's a singular kind of indefinite pronoun. But to avoid saying like his or her, to avoid being sexist, we're going to say there. We're going to prefer logical agreement. This is the singular there. It's kind of a feature of colloquial English, singular there. You could say all people must show their identification if you want to be more formal, or his or her that identification. The group wants to publicize its views, but you could treat it as a collective and say their kind of more colloquial style. It's okay. It's more informal style. Everyone has their failing. It's the same thing. It's the singular they. Or you could change it all to plural. Or everybody has his or her failing, or all have their failings, plural. What about the next one? Indefinite plus partitive. What do you think? None are left. None is left. Some grammar Nazis or traditional grammar people will insist on is because they think is an indefinite singular pronoun, or it's an indefinite, or it's a singular quantifier. Although in the history of English, that's not necessarily the case. That's kind of a newer rule. And really most of us in English would say none are, because logically referring to no P's. Okay. None are. That's more common. So it's not incorrect to say none are. If you really want to sound very formal, hyper-formal, very British, you could say none is, and some people write like that. That's okay. Just to me sounds artificial or unnatural. I would say none are. Each of the students is or are, again, just like there. Is, if you want to be more formal, following grammatical agreement, or are, logical agreement, more informal. And again, their test booklet, or his or her test booklet, or all students are supposed to bring their test booklets, plural. 34, that's the same as 32. 35, none of the book. So here we say none, meaning a part of, no part of the book. So there it makes sense to say is. 36, none of them were or was. A grammar Nazi will insist on none was, but I think few people would really talk like that or write like that. Logically, we're talking about none of them, logically plural, and we would say none of them were in court. That's what we would logically say. All right, any questions? Now let's move on to page 148, commas. There's been argument for a long time among editors, grammarians, and language teachers about commas. If you have three things in a row, X, Y, and Z, do you need that comma right before the and? X, comma, Y, comma, and Z. If you insist on that comma before the and in the list, a series, is called the Oxford comma. Other people prefer the serial comma, just X, comma, Y, and Z, serial comma. Does it make a difference? Well, maybe sometimes. Look at these sentences, and in which sentences are affected by the comma? In which sentences do you need an Oxford comma? In which sentences does it matter? Take a look. Okay, in most of these, probably it doesn't make a difference. And I would say go with your preference. In those cases where it doesn't make a difference, if you prefer the Oxford comma, fine. You should have that freedom. If you prefer the serial comma, I'm more of a serial comma person, go with that. Just be consistent in your style, except for where it makes a difference. In some of these, it makes a difference, and you do need the Oxford comma. You do need the Oxford comma sometimes for clarity. So 1, no difference. 2, no difference. 3, it kind of helps to parse or to understand which goes with the and. You've got 2 and phrases. There it makes a difference. Raspberry, blueberry, and peach pies. It makes a difference there. 4, I think it makes a difference. My boss is, what comes after the comma, is that in what we call in a positive? A positive means kind of a modifier. It's extra information. I talked with my boss, comma, who is Chris and who is my best friend. That's what 4 sounds like. So if your boss is Chris and he is your best friend, then 4 is okay. But if you mean 3 different people, then I talked with my boss, comma, Chris, comma, and my best friend. So there it makes a difference. So sometimes it makes a difference logically. Number 5, same thing. Is John a magician and a guitarist, or do you mean pick up John, a magician, and a guitarist, 3 people? 6, obviously no difference. 7, it's kind of clear, but the meaning is clear, but then you've got kind of long phrases here. And there the comma is better, not so much for clarity of what goes with what, but it's just more readable because you got scraped off paint off the door frame. That's kind of a fairly long clause, a verb phrase. And then alphabetize just books by main character first name, comma, because that's kind of a long phrase. And it's easier to read. It's easier for the brain to process this if you have that 3rd comma before and successfully startled the neighbor's dog twice. Number 8, it makes a difference. Is the ex-boyfriend an herbalist and a pet detective, or is it about 3 people? 9, it helps to kind of parse or to mentally figure what goes with thought. So there it makes a difference. Black and white, red and yellow, and blue and green. 3 different kind of sets, 3 different sets. 10, no difference. 11, it makes a difference. Are these 3 people or is it 1 person? 12, this is a famous example from the internet. I love my parents, Lady Gaga and Humpty Dumpty. So your parents are Lady Gaga and Humpty Dumpty. It's kind of funny because it's so easy to interpret this as 2 people or 3. Probably, hopefully, my parents, Lady Gaga and Humpty Dumpty are 3 separate groups of people. I hope that's the meaning. So there the Oxford comma is necessary for clarity unless you're trying to be funny. 13, this is a real example also. The book is dedicated to my parents, Carl Sagan, the famous scientist, and God. So your parents are Carl Sagan and God? Well, that must be an interesting family too. So you need the Oxford comma to indicate that these are 3 separate people. Things. 14, here it's necessary to indicate that Nelson Mandela is not an 800-year-old demigod and mushroom collector. These are 3 people, so you need the Oxford comma here. Same thing in 15, you need the comma to indicate that JFK and Stalin are not drug dealers, but are 3 separate people. And you see in the book down below, there's a description of where it actually made a difference in a legal case, where a court ruled based on a certain interpretation of the commas. And it made a difference. The law was not written clearly enough. So the courts had to decide what was the intended meaning or interpretation of the law. And they kind of had to make their best guess based on the punctuation and what was the intention of the writers of the law. Down at the bottom, on the left, there's a famous joke that depends on the commas. Eat, shoots, and leaves. And on the right, there's a famous picture on the internet where it sounds like Rachel Ray is kind of an American TV cooking celebrity. She hosts a cooking show. She's a famous cooking show host. There's this magazine that makes it sound like she's a horrible person who likes to cook her family and her dog. Now, the truth is somebody photoshopped out the commas. There were commas there. Cooking, comma, her family, comma, and her dog. There were commas there. Or at least after cooking, there was a comma. Someone photoshopped it out and made it look like the magazine made a bad mistake. They didn't. It was just removed by Photoshop as a joke later. So this TV chef does not enjoy cannibalism, so don't worry. Okay, that's it for now. Next time we are going to look at some other grammar stuff, participles and related stuff next time. See you later.